Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, September 19, 2024. President Joe Biden at the Economic Club of Washington says the Federal Reserve's interest rate cut this week is not a declaration of victory, but it is a declaration of progress. He says to signal we've entered a new phase of our economy and our recovery. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer introduces a bill to fund the federal government if the House Speaker Mike Johnson is unable to come up with a version that can pass the House. The deadline to get a new spending law in place and avoid a shutdown is 12 days away. Senate passes a $2.9 billion supplemental spending bill for veterans' benefits. The House already passed it, so it will be signed into law. White House responds to the news from U.S. intelligence that Iran hacked the Donald Trump presidential campaign and sent stolen material to people associated with the then Joe Biden reelection campaign. And Hezbollah's leader calls the attacks this week where electronic devices exploded an act of war by Israel. And Israeli military jets increased strikes on southern Lebanon. Associated Press writes that President Joe Biden said Thursday the Federal Reserve's decision to lower interest rates was an important signal that inflation has eased as he poked at Donald Trump's economic policies as a failure in the past and sure to, quote, fail again if revived. President Biden told the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., lowering interest rates isn't a declaration of victory, it's a declaration of progress, a signal we've entered a new phase in our economy and our recovery. The article continues, the Democratic president emphasized that there was more work left to do, but he used his speech to burnish his economic legacy, even as he criticized Trump, his Republican predecessor, who is running for another term. Here's President Biden at the Economic Club of Washington.
2.5 years after the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates, it announced that it would begin lowering interest rates. I think it's good news for consumers, and it means the cost of buying a home, a car, and so much more will be going down. And it's good news, in my view, for the overall economy, because lower borrowing costs will support economic growth. And it's an important signal from the Federal Reserve to the nation that after repeated interest hikes to cool down inflation has come back down, and the Fed is switched to lowering rates to keep the country growing, the economy growing. At its peak, as you all know, inflation was 9.1% in the United States. Today, it is much closer to 2%. It doesn't mean our work is done. Far from it. Far from it. No one should confuse why I'm here. I'm not here to take a victory lap. I'm not here to say a job well done. I'm not here to say we don't have a hell of a lot more work to do. We do have more work to do. But what I am here to speak about is how far we come, how we got here, and most importantly, the foundation that I believe built for a more prosperous and equitable future in America. So let's be clear. The Fed lowering interest rates isn't a declaration of victory. It's a declaration of progress. It's a signal we've entered a new phase of our economy and our recovery. You know, I believe the importance for the country to recognize this progress because if we don't, the progress we made will remain locked in the fear of negative mindset that dominated our economic outlook since the pandemic began.
President Joe Biden at the Economic Club of Washington, D.C. His speech ran about a half hour. We covered it live on the C-SPAN networks, and you can find the video at cspan.org. MarketWatch, reporting on the speech, writes that President Biden talked up the importance of the U.S. central bank's independence while criticizing Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump's stated desire to wield more influence over the Fed. Jared Bernstein, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, was at today's White House news conference. He was asked about the timing of the Federal Reserve's interest rate cut.
Thanks, Jared. So this rate cut is colliding with presidential politics. At what point do you think Americans will start to feel the broad economic improvements that come with this rate cut? Would it happen before the election?
Well, let me start with the political reference. I'd like to quote from you from a Wall Street Journal lead editorial a couple of days ago. Quote, "We don't agree with those who say a cut in rates this week is political or intended to help Kamala Harris." Now, I don't think the ed board of the Wall Street Journal is associated much with Democrats or liberals, so I take that as a statement that I very much agree with on the non-politicalization, I don't know how to say that word, on the fact that what Chair Powell was doing was monetary policy, not politics. Now, you're more relevant question is about when people start to feel these interest rate cuts, right? That was the other thing you asked. Interestingly, the first part of that answer is already. Because of the priced-in dynamics, that is, the mortgage rate, we talked about housing a minute ago, you go back a few months, it was 7.5%. As of this morning, it was 6.1, I believe, 6.15, if I'm remembering correctly. That's a big step down, and that occurred before any Fed rate cuts took place, in large part due to the market expectations that those rate cuts were going to occur. So that's a priced-in effect. Now then there's the dynamics in in auto loans, in credit card loans, in business lending, and that can take anywhere from weeks to months to quarters. I think Powell talked about it rippling through. So that occurs with more of a lag, but some of it's already priced in.
And do you think the Fed waited too long to cut rates?
I'm not going to comment on Federal Reserve monetary policy.
Jared Bernstein chairs the White House Council of Economic Advisors at today's White House news conference. Wall Street today, the Dow up 522, NASDAQ up 440, S&P up 95. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer begins a CNN article announced on Thursday that he is taking steps to avert a shutdown as Speaker Mike Johnson's next move remains unclear. Schumer said on the Senate floor that he will take an initial procedural step that will give the Senate the option to set up a vote next week on a government funding extension as the threat of a shutdown looms at the end of the month. After the House failed on Wednesday to pass a funding plan that included a controversial measure targeting non-citizen voting, Johnson has not yet said exactly what he will do next. That was from CNN. Here's the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Yesterday afternoon, to the surprise of virtually no one, Speaker Johnson's deeply flawed and highly partisan CR failed by a vote of 202 to 220. The no votes included Democrats, Republicans, fiscal hawks, conservative ideologues, and people in between. In other words, there was broad opposition to the Speaker's partisan maneuver. It's time the Speaker moves on. Sadly, time is not a luxury that Congress has right now. Today is September 19th. The government shutdown is September 30th. That's 11 days away. And instead of doing the bipartisan work everyone knows is required for avoiding a shutdown, the House Republican leadership has wasted 2 weeks, listening to Donald Trump's ridiculous claims on the campaign trail. Now that their efforts have failed, House Republicans don't seem to have any plan for actually keeping the government open. So the Senate will step in. Later today, I'll file cloture on a legislative vehicle that will enable us to prevent a Trump shutdown in the event that Speaker Johnson does not work with us in a bipartisan, bicameral manner. Both sides are going to spend the next few days trying to figure out the best path remaining for keeping the government open. By filing today, I'm giving the Senate maximum flexibility for preventing a shutdown. Democrats and Americans don't want a Trump shutdown. I dare say most Republicans, at least in this chamber, don't want to see a Trump shutdown. And the American people certainly don't want their elected representatives in Washington creating a shutdown for the sake of Donald Trump's ridiculous claims when it's clear he doesn't even know how the legislative process works. Senators are ready to work this process the right way. Democrats talking to Republicans, both sides at the negotiating table finding a way to keep the government open without partisan hoopla. The Speaker must choose. Either keep paying blind obeisance to Donald Trump and his ridiculous claims, or work with both parties to spare the American people from a Republican shutdown.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor today. The House Wednesday night defeated the 6-month government spending measure that included proof of citizenship to vote language. As Senator Schumer mentioned, the vote was 202 yes, 220 no. 2 Republicans voted present. 14 Republicans voted no. 3 Democrats voted yes. Speaker Mike Johnson spoke to reporters for a minute and a half Wednesday night after that vote.
Well, everybody, you just watched the legislative process play out. The play that we ran tonight was the right play. It's the right fight for the American people. It's the one that they demand and deserve. I've made it very clear over the last couple of weeks, we have two very important objectives right now. Congress has an obligation to fund the government, and Congress has an obligation to ensure that our elections are secure and fair and free. And this vote tonight would have accomplished both. I'm very disappointed that it didn't pass. I want to note that every Democrat except 3 went on record once again for the second time voting against election security. What the SAVE Act would have accomplished, as everyone knows, is to ensure that illegals and non-citizens cannot vote in the upcoming election. Right now, we have no mechanism for the states to require proof of citizenship before they register to vote. That is a serious problem. It is about an 88% issue in polling across the country, and it is not partisan. But we missed that. We ran the play. It was the best play. It was the right one. And so now we go back to the playbook. We'll draw up another play, and we'll come up with a solution. I'm already talking to colleagues about their many ideas. We have time to fix the situation, and we'll get right to it. I'm disappointed. I know this was the right thing to do, and I think the American people are going to let a lot of the folks that voted no tonight hear their concerns about it. So stay posted. Stay posted.
Complicating this with his push for a shutdown.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, Wednesday night in the U.S. Capitol building after the vote failed. This morning, C-SPAN asked Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, who voted yes on last night's government funding bill, what he would like Speaker Johnson to do next.
I wish he'd bring something back, and we haven't talked about it. If these people are not going to vote for something connected with the elections, maybe they can bring back some provision regarding the border, which is still out of control. But if Mike doesn't feel he can do that, or we're going to run out of time by the end of the month, I think he's just going to have what we call a clean CR and extend funding the government for, say, another 3 or 4 months, which I don't like, because I think we ought to be getting more than that. We are in a crisis in this country like never before. People flowing across the border, and the Democrat Party really not stepping up to the plate and saying we don't want these people to vote.
How do you respond to your colleague, Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona? Tonight, the House is expected to vote on the Uniparty's bloated spending bill. He said on X, the House has already passed the SAVE Act. He added in a thread later, and there's no need to plunge our country deeper into debt for talking points.
Well, a continuing resolution means funding the government at the same level as we did a year ago. And quite frankly, if we could do that for 4 or 5 years and not increase the amount of spending, we wouldn't be in bad shape at all. And Andy has to know that with a Democrat Senate and a Democrat president, ultimately this budget is probably going to have spending increases in there. Like I said, if we can hold things to even, I would consider that a victory.
What do you say to the former president who yesterday on his Truth Social page said that Republicans should not approve any continuing resolution unless it includes that SAVE Act in it, even if it means a partial government shutdown?
Well, as you know, right now, and I may change my mind in the next week, right now that's the way I would vote. I would like to demand something in there. The problem we have is, like I said, 14 or 16, I think 16 Republicans refuse to vote for the plan, right? If we're going to get a requirement that you're a citizen to vote, if we're going to get that, we need to have the vote in which all the Republicans are united in the House first. And right now we don't have that.
Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program this morning. Politico writes that lawmakers widely expect Speaker Mike Johnson will put a spending bill on the floor next week that has widespread Democratic support, funding the government into December without a GOP voting proposal. Johnson himself isn't indicating what his plan B is after his proposed spending plan, which paired government funding through March with a Republican plan to require proof of citizenship in order to register to vote, failed on the House floor Wednesday night. 5 Republicans familiar with the internal discussions indicate that the House's ultimate landing spot is inevitable anyway. They'll have to vote next week on a clean bill to fund the government into December, forcing Johnson to lean on Democrats to avoid a shutdown that would kick in on October 1st. That was from Politico. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, spoke about the CR at his own news conference this morning.
I have not spoken to Speaker Johnson today or subsequent to the collapse of the House Republican shutdown bill. But time is short. Our staffs are in communication with each other. And what occurs over the next few days will be determinative as to whether we can find the common ground necessary to fund the government, avoid a shutdown, and meet the needs of the American people. This should not be complicated. In May of last year, more than 300 members of the House of Representatives, including a majority of House Republicans, supported the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act, which set top-line spending numbers for fiscal year 2025. And we all agreed that partisan policy writers would be left out of any appropriations bills. House Republicans are violating their own agreement. Why? Because they want to jam Trump's Project 2025 agenda down the throats of the American people, and in the alternative, shut down the government. That's reckless and irresponsible. We will continue to stand up for the American people.
Would that include money for the Secret Service?
Just to follow up on Chad's question, you said you haven't spoken to Speaker Johnson since the bill for his proposal failed last night. Can you characterize more generally what your conversations with the Speaker have been on this? Are you guys on the same page about how this ultimately will end? Does the Speaker understand that this is leading towards a clean CR?
Any private conversation with Speaker Johnson will remain private. However, there's nothing inconsistent between what I may say to Speaker Johnson privately and what we are saying publicly. This is not complicated. We have already reached an agreement connected to the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act with respect to the top-line spending number for fiscal year 2025. And we will not accept any partisan right-wing policy changes to current law. That was an agreement that we reached last year, and we expect that agreement to be kept. We are also, as House Democrats, not going to allow Republicans to cut $12 billion in funding for veterans' health care that would undermine our ability to meet the needs of veterans who are suffering painful exposure to toxic substances, burn pits, and Agent Orange. As House Democrats, we will not let extreme MAGA Republicans shortchange our military readiness to the tune of $6 billion. And we will also not let House Republicans fail to meet the needs of the American people who are suffering from the harmful impact of extreme weather events by shortchanging the American people by $25 billion. And so there's nothing inconsistent with that public position that I might otherwise say to Speaker Johnson privately.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the House Minority Leader, at a news conference today. While conversations continue among lawmakers on funding the government when the fiscal year begins October 1st, that's fiscal year 2025, today a smaller spending bill for the current fiscal year, 2024, is heading to President Biden for signature into law. Military Times writes that Senate lawmakers approved a $3 billion budget stopgap for the Department of Veterans Affairs on Thursday, preventing a threatened delay in the delivery of some veterans' benefits checks next month. The move came just 2 days after House lawmakers advanced the same appropriations measure, which also mandates a report from department officials on the reasons behind the department's budget shortfall within a month. The legislation is expected to be signed into law by President Joe Biden before the end of Friday. That's from the Military Times. Before the bill passed in the Senate by voice vote, Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, tried to attach an amendment to offset the spending by cutting money from an Energy Department loan program.
My amendment would just simply offset the new money they need for the veterans' affairs that they didn't calculate well and didn't appropriate by taking it from somewhere else in the budget. To me, it seems eminently reasonable. Rather than borrow more money and put ourselves further into debt, we have a $35 trillion debt. Why don't we find something in the budget maybe that's not an emergency, take the money from there and pay for the veterans' benefits? My amendment would ensure that veterans receive their benefits without adding to the national debt. My amendment is simple. It pays for the veterans' benefits by rescinding $2.9 billion in Department of Energy loan guarantees. The American taxpayers should not be asked to subsidize companies with vast resources, often multi-million-dollar owners that are for this green energy that we're going to subsidize. Well, which is more important, subsidizing millionaire owners of green energy or paying for veterans benefits? Why not take one to pay for the other?
Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington State, chair of the Appropriations Committee, opposed the amendment.
You know, when it comes to supporting our veterans, the bottom line is we have to live up to our word and get them the benefits and care they were promised. I'm pleased to say we have a long bipartisan history of coming together and putting our veterans first. That's what the bill before us is about. But this amendment would jeopardize all of that by making partisan cuts to unrelated programs. Our veterans should not be used as partisan leverage, simple as that. Now, I fully outright oppose this amendment on the merits. But even for colleagues who may feel differently, I would urge you to join me in voting against this amendment, because we should all agree that veterans are not fair game for partisan poison pills. Our promise to our veterans and their families is a sacred responsibility we have to live up to, not political leverage. I urge all of my colleagues who feel the same to join me in voting no.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington State, Appropriations Committee chair on the Senate floor. The Senator Paul amendment was defeated on a 47-47 vote, short of the 60 votes needed. And then the underlying $2.9 billion Veterans Department supplemental funding bill passed by voice vote. It passed the House earlier this week, so it goes to President Biden, expect to be signed into law. Story from The Hill. The VA has pointed to the PACT Act, a landmark law that passed with bipartisan support in 2022 as a key driver behind the budget shortfall, pointing to increases in enrollment in VA healthcare, appointments, and applications benefits. There are still questions around how Congress will respond to another request from the VA for an additional $12 billion in fiscal 2025 for medical care amid some resistance from conservatives. That was from The Hill. This is Washington Today. Returning to the House agenda, today members passed two more bills in what has been referred to as Woke Week. The first bill, End Woke Higher Education Act, would, as a Washington Examiner article explains, require colleges and universities to put in place First Amendment principles in order to receive federal funding. It also bars accreditors from requiring partisan frameworks and ideological litmus tests for schools in order to receive accreditation. Congressman Bob Good, Republican from Virginia, spoke in favor of the bill on the House floor.
The federal government pays billions in hardworking taxpayer dollars each year to colleges and universities, assuming that accredited schools are preparing students to think academically and to earn a good job after graduation. But it's increasingly clear that many students aren't prepared for life after college. And today, $1.6 trillion of taxpayer dollars are missing from the Treasury because graduates aren't paying back their student loans. Of course, Democrats think that's wonderful because they think it's the government's job to provide free college education for everyone. Sadly, many college students leave their university with little to show for it besides crushing debt, bleak job prospects in the Biden-Harris economy, and too often liberal brainwashing from what they were taught. Students are suffering under the misguided priorities of our institutions, and accreditors are contributing to the problem. Instead of working with colleges to ensure that academic progress will lead to student success, accreditors are determined to impose their diversity, equity, inclusion standards on institutions. This bill simply prohibits accreditors from forcing colleges to adopt DEI standards in order to receive accreditation. In addition, this bill protects the fundamental rights of free speech and free association on college campuses. That means religious clubs on college campuses can have the same access to resources that are available to any other student group. Unfortunately, here in 2024, it is still common for faith-based organizations to be discriminated against on college campuses, which makes this legislation necessary and important.
Congressman Bob Good, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor. Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat from Oregon, opposed the bill.
There's a lot we could be doing in Congress to improve higher education, and I tell you, this is not it. This bill combines two extreme bills into one, attacking intellectual freedom and diversity on college campuses while fanning the flames of culture war rhetoric to score political points. This so-called End Woke Higher Education Act would allow institutions of higher education to eliminate policies and programs that protect students and staff from discrimination because of who they are, where they come from, what they believe, or who they love. By forbidding accreditors from considering diversity and inclusion efforts and allowing schools to require all applicants and employees to abide by a statement of faith, colleges and universities would be free to remove curricula that highlight the historical experience of marginalized groups. They could reject students from attending federally funded institutions based on the students' religious beliefs. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on college campuses is a pervasive problem. Yet this bill would open the door for more schools to discriminate against Jewish or Muslim students solely because of their faith. Is it woke to believe that Jewish and Muslim students should be able to attend the schools they choose and join the clubs that fit their interests? Is it woke to ask schools not to subsidize speakers that make certain groups of students feel unsafe on campus? No, it's not typical to have a term in a bill that is undefined. There's no definition of woke in this bill. What is it? Do they believe it when they see it, or do they define it when they want to? Instead of limiting access to inclusive, accurate curricula, we should be focused on vigorous enforcement of our civil rights laws. They protect all students and provide equal opportunities.
Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat from Oregon, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 213 to 201. And the House passed another bill today titled Prioritizing Economic Growth Over Woke Policies Act, which, as the Washington Examiner article puts it, seeks to limit the ways in which federal regulators can insert ESG into the financial system through rulemaking. It would also prevent the Securities and Exchange Commission from forcing a publicly traded company to include a shareholder proposal or even discussing a proposal in a proxy statement. The vote on that bill was 215 to 203, with one voting present. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Since 1979, in partnership with the cable industry, C-SPAN has provided complete coverage of the halls of Congress, from the House and Senate floors to congressional hearings, party briefings, and committee meetings. C-SPAN gives you a front row seat to how issues are debated and decided, with no commentary, no interruptions, and completely unfiltered. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. New York Times article reads, Kamala Harris overwhelmingly impressed voters in her debate with Donald J. Trump. A new set of polls from the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Siena College found, but she has failed so far to seize a decisive advantage in the presidential campaign. The race is deadlocked nationally. Yet in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania, Ms. Harris has a lead of 4 percentage points, a slight edge that is unchanged since early August. She has reassembled much of the core Democratic coalition in the state, winning the support of black voters, young voters, and women there. That was from the New York Times. Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge hosted a panel today titled The 2024 Presidential Election, How to Analyze It Like a Pro. One of the panelists was Jonathan Martin, Politico senior political columnist.
Look, I read a piece today that I'll happily plug, and for those watching on C-SPAN, you can find it on Politico.com right now. Yeah, it's a 7-state campaign in terms of the battlegrounds. We all know that. But really, this is coming down to Trump effectively trying to win 3 East Coast states and block any path that Harris has to 270 electoral votes. The 3 states are Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, and the math is very straightforward. If Trump carries those 3 states, she has nowhere else to go. She cannot find 270 electoral votes, barring some miracle in Florida or some other kind of massive red state. And you see that in Trump's spending. He is spent a ton of money in Pennsylvania, the most of any state. Just behind that's Georgia. And last week he went up with a much bigger television reservations than he had previously in North Carolina. And that's their approach. And so this comes down to, yes, can Kamala Harris keep the so-called blue wall of the Midwest, the Great Lakes states actually, more precise, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But it's really Pennsylvania. Can she hold Pennsylvania, which I think everybody agrees is the hardest of those three Great Lakes states for her to hold? Biden grew up there, and he won it by about, 80,000 votes 4 years ago. But the good news for Kamala Harris is if she can't hold Pennsylvania, she at least has an insurance policy. You can call it the Southern strategy, or the updated version of the Southern strategy, which is she can go to Georgia or Carolina and try to win either of those. Not easy. Those two states have gone once each for a Democratic candidate for president in this century. Georgia, of course, 4 years ago, where Biden narrowly carried it, and North Carolina in 2008 when Obama carried it. So it's not easy, but it's a hell of a lot easier for her than it was going to be for Biden, who was confined entirely to those three Great Lakes states. Biden was not going to be competitive in the South, nor I don't think in the West, Nevada and Arizona, two states that we can come back to. So to me, that's the map. I think if you look a little closer at demography, there's two groups where Harris needs to make improvements, and she still has work to do. One is with black men. Part of the reason why Trump is still pulling in the teens overall with black voters is because he's winning support from black men. Can Kamala Harris peel some of those folks back? She's going to have to get Trump closer to single digits with black men than where he is right now. And the other group are what you could call soft Republicans, kind of folks that voted for George W. Bush. They're more moderate. They don't like Trump's conduct. They don't like his behavior. They don't want to vote for Trump. But they're not quite sold on Kamala Harris. Can she get those folks over to her? Maybe they don't vote for the top of the ticket. Maybe they write somebody in. Can she get them to vote for her?
Jonathan Martin, Politico senior political columnist, at a panel hosted by Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge on the 2024 presidential election. And here on C-SPAN Radio, we'll return to the presidential election in just a moment. But first, some news about a gubernatorial race. From CNN, Mark Robinson, the controversial and socially conservative Republican nominee for governor of North Carolina, made a series of inflammatory comments on a pornography website's message board more than a decade ago, in which he referred to himself as a black Nazi and expressed support for reinstating slavery, a CNN K-File investigation found. Despite a recent history of anti-transgender rhetoric, Robinson said he enjoyed watching transgender pornography. A review of archived messages found in which he also referred to himself as a perv. That was the article from CNN. Mark Robinson posted a video.
Hey guys, Lieutenant Governor Robinson and your Republican nominee for governor as well, of course. Well, guys, the news media is at it again. My opponent is at it again. You all have seen the half-truths and outright lies of Josh Stein on these ads over and over again. And now a story leaked by him to CNN is appearing now. Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before. Folks, this race right now, our opponents are desperate to shift the focus here from the substantive issues and focus on what you are concerned with to salacious tabloid trash. We cannot allow that to happen. And folks, we've seen this type of stuff in the past as well. Clarence Thomas famously once said he was the victim of a high-tech lynching. Well, it looks like Mark Robinson is too, by a man who refuses to stand on stage and debate me about the real issues that face you. Instead, they want to focus on salacious tabloid lies. We're not going to let them do that. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it. And we know that with your help, we will. God bless you. And we will see you where? On the campaign trail.
Mark Robinson, Republican nominee for North Carolina governor, posting that video. The news broke Wednesday night as NBC reports it Iranians sent unsolicited emails that included stolen material that was not publicly available from former President Donald Trump's campaign to people associated with his Democratic political rival, the FBI and 2 other government agencies said Wednesday. The FBI and officials from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said there was currently no information indicating that recipients associated with President Joe Biden's campaign had responded to the emails, which the government officials condemned as part of an effort to stoke discord and undermine confidence in our electoral process. In an all-caps Truth Social post Wednesday night, Donald Trump claimed Harris and her campaign were illegally spying on me, to be known as the Iran case. That was from NBC News. Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, also brought this up during his rally Wednesday night in Uniondale, New York.
And yesterday, 3 agencies of the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden administration, the FBI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they just released a report confirming that Iran actors hacked into the Trump campaign's email accounts and in turn sought to give the hacked materials to the Biden-Harris campaign. They gave them all of the materials because Biden is working with Iran, and Iran doesn't exactly like me because they were ready to make a deal, except we had an election that was rigged and stolen. And look at what's happening to our world now. But no, Iran hacked into my campaign. I don't know what the hell they found. I'd like to find out. Couldn't have been too exciting. But they gave it to the Biden campaign. I can't believe it. Oh, yes, I can. But this is really foreign election interference. This is real election interference, not the phony crap that they've been trying to pin on me with Russia for years.
Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee and former president, at a campaign rally Wednesday night in Uniondale, New York on Long Island. Again, from the NBC News article, a Harris campaign spokesperson said the campaign has cooperated with law enforcement since it learned about the hacking effort, saying we're not aware of any material being sent directly to the campaign. A few individuals were targeted on their personal emails with what looked like a spam or phishing attempt. This issue also came up today at the White House briefing with the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Thanks, Karine. The FBI and other U.S. intelligence agencies said that Iranian hackers sent stolen information from the Trump campaign to individuals associated with the Biden campaign. This is before President Biden left the race. So was the president made aware of this at the time?
So what I can say is that we learned about the statement yesterday, and the president has been made aware of it now. But we learned about the statement yesterday. Look, this is something that the FBI, ODNI, and CISA have to speak to. They put out their statement, so I would refer you to them specifically. But more broadly, what I can say about this is that no foreign government like Iran or Russia are actively seeking to influence in our elections. And so we have said that, we know that, and that's why you've seen us take actions to hold accountable those who seek to undermine confidence in our democracy, and we will continue to do so. And so that has been something that we've said from here. The ODNI has shared with the American people what we know about the foreign influence, including by making public the hack of the Trump campaign on August 19th. In early September, the Department of Justice brought criminal charges against those involved in covert influence operations on behalf of RT. And so this is something that obviously law enforcement is and our intelligence community is focused on, and so they're better to certainly speak to it directly.
Share what information was in those emails, and if the president has been made aware of the information in those emails?
That is something that they could speak to. The president has made aware. We saw the statement yesterday. That's when we learned about it. The president obviously is aware of it now, but I would have to refer you to FBI.
Didn't receive any advance briefing before that statement went out?
We were made aware of when the statement came out yesterday. Now the president is aware himself. I would have to refer you to FBI, CISA, and ODNI.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre getting reporters' questions in the White House briefing room. The press secretary put out a statement today about the visit of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, writing on Thursday, September 26, President Biden will meet with President Zelensky of Ukraine at the White House. Vice President Harris will also meet separately with President Zelensky at the White House. The leaders will discuss the state of the war between Russia and Ukraine, including Ukraine's strategic planning and U.S. support for Ukraine in its defense against Russian aggression. The president and vice president will emphasize their unshakable commitment to stand with Ukraine until it prevails in this war. That was the statement from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. And in a Ukraine-related and U.S. presidential race-related story today at the State Department, some questions to spokesperson Matthew Miller about Ukraine ties to the man suspected of trying to assassinate former President Donald Trump last weekend.
Have you been able to substantiate or find any evidence that anyone in Ukraine or anywhere else informed you, meaning the embassy or the State Department here, of this guy who is accused of attempting to assassinate former president?
So I've seen obviously some of the public reporting where various individuals or organizations have said that they were in contact with our embassy in Ukraine about his activities in Ukraine. We to date have found no record of such a communication. I can't rule out completely that there wasn't any such communication, but as of date, we've found no record of one.
Okay, and that's with the embassy.
The embassy in Ukraine, yes.
Or embassy staff. What about here?
We haven't found any other. Obviously, the State Department's a big place, so that's why I say I can't rule out that someone didn't have a communication with somebody somewhere in the State Department. But we, as of yet, have found no record about anyone, any individual or organization communicating with us about his activities there.
I realize this is a difficult question to answer, and you may know why. But if you had, then what could the State Department do about it? If you were told that there was some American citizen abroad acting suspiciously, what could this department have been able to do?
So it would depend on the circumstance, but if, for example, we were told that an American abroad was acting in a way that was a threat to others, it's the type of thing that we could refer to law enforcement, and as a standard course of practice, we would refer to law enforcement.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference at the State Department in Washington. Story from Reuters: deadly Israeli attacks that blew up Hezbollah radios and pagers crossed all red lines, the leader of the heavily armed Iran-backed Lebanese movement said on Thursday, as the United States called for restraint and urgent de-escalation. Lebanon and Hezbollah have blamed Israel for attacks on Hezbollah's communications equipment that killed 37 people and wounded around 3,000. Overwhelming Lebanese hospitals and wreaking bloody havoc on the militant group. There is no doubt that we have been subjected to a major security and military blow that is unprecedented in the history of the resistance and unprecedented in the history of Lebanon, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said in his TV address. This type of killing, targeting, and crime may be unprecedented in the world, he said, appearing in front of a featureless red background in his customary black turban. The attacks crossed all red lines, he said. The enemy went beyond all controls, laws, and morals, he said, adding the attacks could be considered war crimes or a declaration of war. That reporting from Reuters. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met in Paris today with the foreign ministers of France, Britain, and Italy, talking about foreign affairs. During a one-on-one meeting with the French foreign minister, Secretary Blinken spoke of the Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah conflict.
We, of course, talked about all of the front burner issues that we're dealing with. And France and the United States are united in calling for restraint and urging de-escalation when it comes to the Middle East in general and when it comes to Lebanon in particular. We continue to work to get a ceasefire for Gaza over the finish line. And as we discussed with some of you just a day ago in Egypt, we believe that remains both possible and necessary. But meanwhile, we don't want to see any escalatory actions by any party that make that even more difficult. There is a real problem that needs to be resolved when it comes to northern Israel and southern Lebanon, and that is the fact that since October 8th, Hezbollah has been firing rockets into Israel. Israel's been firing back. The population in both northern Israel and southern Lebanon has had to flee their homes, and we all want to see them be able to go back to their homes, and that requires a secure environment. France and the United States believe strongly and are working together toward a diplomatic resolution and an agreement that would create the conditions for security that would allow people to return to their homes. And we talked about that today.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Paris with the French foreign minister. He's also there meeting with the foreign ministers of other European nations. New York Times writes that UN child rights experts on Thursday condemned the catastrophic consequences of Israeli military operations in the Gaza Strip, which they said violated international law. The experts who make up the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child issued their findings after a review of Israel's compliance with international standards for the protection of children, as outlined by the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That was from the New York Times. In Washington, on the U.S. House floor, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat of Michigan, spoke about it.
We are witnessing the Israeli government carry out a genocide in Gaza. Recently, the Gaza Ministry of Health released a 649-page document with the name, age, ID number of 34,344 Palestinians killed in Gaza who have been identified. Most of them are women, children, and their elderly. This is just the identified individuals. Many public health experts believe the death toll will climb. Every single day, higher numbers will come out due to disease and starvation. There are thousands more who are dismembered, unrecognizable, or buried beneath the rubble. But behind these numbers are real people who have their future stolen, their lives forever changed. The first 14 pages alone are names of babies. I wish my colleagues would look at it, who were under the age of 1 when they were killed. 14 pages of babies' names. That's 710 babies that the Israeli government has murdered. This is not self-defense. This is genocide. How can anyone justify this?
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, today on the House floor in Washington. Story from the New Jersey Globe. U.S. Senator George Helmy's time in the Senate won't last long, but he intends to use every minute of it for the betterment of New Jersey. He said in his maiden speech on the Senate floor today, the 44-year-old Helmy, who took office last week after being appointed to replace disgraced former Senator Bob Menendez, has spent most of his career as a staffer, first for the late Senator Frank Lautenberg, then for Senator Cory Booker, and finally in the office of Governor Phil Murphy, where Helmy served as chief of staff for more than 4 years. That time behind the scenes, Helmy said today, gives him an interesting perspective on the task of being a U.S. Senator. Reporting from the New Jersey Globe, here is part of Senator Helmy's speech.
It was always my job to be the guy behind the guy. It was my job to make sure they were prepared, that they had the best possible counsel, and were ready to make the consequential decisions required of every United States senator. So standing here now is a little odd, a little overwhelming, and very humbling. I will, as I have for many years, continue to do my utmost to live to the faith placed in me by Governor Phil Murphy to be thoughtful, diligent, and a forceful voice and representative of the people of New Jersey. And I have a very short window in which to do just that. In fact, it is my stated intention to resign from this post once the general election is certified by Lieutenant Governor Tahisha Way, who also serves as our Secretary of State, at which point Governor Murphy has said he will appoint my duly elected successor. So, there is a possibility that my tenure in this body will last all of 73 days. Should that be the case, that means I will tie for the 10th shortest ever tenure as a United States Senator, which also means I will forever be rooting for the good health and good fortune of those who follow, so that I can make at least one top 10 list at some point in my life.
Senator George Helmy, Democrat from New Jersey, giving his maiden speech on the Senate floor. He said one of the issues he wants to work on in the short time he'll have as a senator is youth mental health. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word. You'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.